Hi, this is Marcy Palmer. Thank you for having me judge your January 2019 photo contest. It's been such a pleasure to look through these images, and I hope you can benefit from some of the comments that I make on them. Thank you. I'll start with the entry-level images. I'm starting with Neighbor's Christmas Light, which got a score of 10 and an honorable mention. It's a fun image. The silly decorations are kind of humorous. The use of color is really interesting. There's contrasting color between the red and the green. And the bear itself is really sharp, really well focused in terms of lens focus, and also the penguin is also really sharp and not overexposed, which is kind of tricky for an image like this. My only suggestion with this is that the house starts to get a little bit blurred, and I think that has to do with depth of field. So maybe using a smaller aperture when taking an image like this would be helpful. Alley Beauty received third place and a score of 11. There's really nice definition in the weeds here. It's sort of hairy, and you can see those little fuzzes along the edges, which is really nice. I think the use of shallow depth of field was a really good one here. And there's contrast between the weeds and the fence behind it. However, the image looks a little bit dark. And I wonder if brightening it up a little bit so that we can see more of the weeds would be helpful. Look Both Ways Before Crossing received a score of 13 and second place for the entry level. I really like how well the ducks are spaced apart and lined across the frame. There's a nice repetition in their forms, and the stop sign, the color in the stop sign provides a really good contrast against the more muted colors that are in the image. I wonder if, a different time of day would have made, the sky pop a little bit more. But I realize that this all has to do with luck and timing. Overall, I think that the image was composed quite well. Tree Owl received a score of 14 and first place. It's really quite beautiful how well the colors pop in this image. The yellow contrasted with the green really captures my attention, as well as the varying directions in line in this image. And so there's lines in the tree, there's lines in the rope that's holding the owl, and there's even lines within the owl itself. And all of those lines are pretty interesting and really help this composition. In the intermediate category, Balloon Fest in the Neighborhood received a score of 10. There's nice repetition in the hot air balloons in the sky, and that shoe balloon is really funny. The road sort of leads you to the balloons. However, there's quite a bit of space over on the right side for the eye to move, which is fine. I wonder if this image would be better suited in color because of all those colors of the balloons. I really would rather see it in color as opposed to black and white. Shades of Tree received a score of 10. I like how the direction of the tree is flipped upside down inside the puddle, so that reflection becomes unexpected. The lines become a little bit abstracted because the direction of those lines are unusual. They're flipped upside down. With this image, there's a lot of attention in the center of the image, and it creates kind of a band through the middle of the image. There's varying textures in the image which create interest, so the textures between the grass, the cement, and the water are interesting. However, I wish that there was a line or some sort of shape that would lead us into the composition from the bottom of the frame and also from the top of the frame, because those areas start to get a bit static. Sublime Suburban Landscape received a score of 11. The waterfall in the foreground is really beautiful. The motion of the water was frozen because of that fast shutter speed and all that light. It's nice and sharp. There's a lot of detail there, which is great. The fountain in the background is in kind of a strange position because I can't see all of what's happening in the fountain. I can't see all of the shape of it, in part because the house behind it is a bit distracting. So the way those things align is a little strange. I do really like the direction of the clouds in the sky and how it's leading us down towards the houses and the little bit of moon over on the right side. The color in this is really nice. Street Artist received a score of 12 in the intermediate category. These girls are very sweet. They're both looking up at the camera, which is great, so we can see their faces, and timing on that I know is a bit tricky with young children. It seems like their faces could be a little bit sharper. I wonder if the autofocus on the camera or the camera focus went to their shoes, because that looks really sharp as opposed to their faces, and it probably has to do with just how they were moving around. Otherwise, I think that the symmetry in the image is really nice. So if you split the frame in half, the spacing on each side is pretty symmetrical, yet there's other stuff in the frame, like the drawing on the sidewalk and the bits of chalk in the background, that make it slightly asymmetrical, as well as the number in the foreground.
December Surprise in My Kitchen, intermediate category, 12 points. I enjoy the contrast in color in this image between the orange-red and green background. The close angle, good lens focus, and tight cropping helps direct the viewer's eye to the color and details in the flower, which are well captured. I think this image might benefit from some more dramatic lighting. The flower is well lit, but the light is flat and even. If the photographer had set up some strong directional light from the side or another angle, that might make this image really pop through the use of strong highlights or shadows.
Looking Down also received a score of 12 and an honorable mention. The cat's expression is pretty funny, and obviously the photographer was quite quick with the camera. The focus is on the furniture, on the edge of the furniture, the curved part of the furniture, but the cat's face is also in focus, and so this works. The cat appears to be looking towards the camera, if not exactly at the camera, but you sort of wonder what it's going to do next, which is fun. One-Upping the Neighbors on Christmas Eve received a score of 13 and an honorable mention. There's a lot of stuff happening in this image, which is fun. There's so many decorations to look at, so many different shapes to look at. There's some repetition of the circular shapes and the wheels of the train, and then there's also the repetition of the trees and the repetition of the windows in the house. But other than that, there's a lot of different textures and a lot of different little things to look at, and a lot of contrasting color between warm and cool, which is interesting. In this image, parts of the image become a little bit overexposed, like part of the train in the middle. There's a green carriage with some gold trees in it that gets a little too bright. I'd like to see a little more detail in that area. And then over on the left side, there's some other areas that are a little overexposed or a little bright. So if there's a way to even out those tones, I think that would make this image a bit stronger. And it's a fun image nonetheless. Neighbor's Plight received a score of 14 in the intermediate category and third place. The action that's captured here is really wonderful. There's a lot of repetition in form and color between the firefighters and the yellow pants that they're wearing, the fire trucks with the red and the yellow and silver, and then also all of the uniforms that are on the ground, as well as the tanks that are on the ground, and the subject of the image, which is the firefighter in the center of the picture. The plants in the extreme foreground get a little distracting, so if there's any way to move over a little bit or kind of get them out of the frame without destroying the neighbor's bushes or your bushes that were in the foreground there, that would be great. Overall, it's really a well-composed image. Dallas Arts District's Weather Abstract by Nature received a score of 14 in the intermediate category and second place. The lines in this are so straight in the building, yet it contrasts quite a bit with the wavy lines and the reflection of the other building and the organic shapes of the clouds that are reflected in the building. So it creates a really interesting contrast between those types of lines and those types of shapes, abstract versus more realistic, or geometric versus organic, and I enjoy that. A Wild Horse Up the Street, located at Phillips C, received a score of 15 in the intermediate category and first place. I really enjoy the shape of the horse against the bright white sky. I know it's an overcast day, but there's a strong tonal contrast there between the horse and what's behind it. I also really like seeing the detail in the grasses below it. And there's a contrasting texture between the metal in the horse and the grasses and then the soft sky. For the advanced category, we'll start with Eldorado Street Side, McKinney, with a score of 11. I really like the way this image was composed, and I like that it was sort of foggy out. There's a lot of orange and yellow in the image that draws your eye across the frame, and there's some nice symmetry in the image as well. The problem that I have here is that the ISO seems to be so high, or there seems to be so much noise in the image, especially in the background, that it's harder to see all the details that I really want to see. And some of the darker areas, like on the left side, there's an area of shade that I can't really see much detail in the trunk or underneath the tree there, and I would like to see those details. Into the Village received a score of 12. The image has a nice pathway through the steps, so it leads our eye from the left side to the right. And there's a lot of little details and things to look at, like the signage over on the left side and the potted plant over on the right and some of the greenery over on the right side. I think I would enjoy this image even more if there was a person or something else in the frame to kind of give it visual weight or kind of ground me within the composition. So that would be my suggestion there. My community entrance in infrared in the advanced category received a score of 12. I like the use of infrared and especially the movement in the tree over on the right side. That blur that happens in the tree I think is really fun, and it contrasts really well with the clouds behind it. I think that the part where I'm getting a little bit lost is towards the bottom of the frame on the left side. All of that water is kind of a flat space, and it would be really nice if there was something that would lead my eye into the frame and up to the waterfalls or over to the right side. So if there was a way to step back, maybe if there's a bit of land there, or I don't know, trying a different angle that may capture that may help. Or even turning more to the right to include more of that tree, and then I don't know what's beyond that tree over on the right side, but maybe something interesting. Leaf Play received a score of 13. The expression on the kids is really nice. Their faces are sharp, which is great. I think that if this was worked on a little bit more in post-production, so that it would bring out some of the warmer tones in the leaves, so if they could be a little bit more orange or yellow, I think that would probably make this pop a little bit more, because there'd be more contrast between that and the blues or the cooler colors in the image. Oxymoron received a score of 14 in the advanced category and was appropriately titled. There's really beautiful symmetry here. The image itself is very sharp, and then contrasting it with what it actually is pretty clever. And the image itself is also well lit, so I really like where the shadows fall in the letters and in the metal of the sewer rim itself. Fallen from His Nest received a score of 14 and an honorable mention in the advanced category. There's nice use of orange and brown in this image. It's in the bird's beak, it's in the ground, it's in the grasses that we see, it's in the stone. In the image, the shallow depth of field is also working well, so there's a nice contrast between the texture of the bird and the ground and what's in the background. It seems like the bird is sort of looking at the viewer, although it's sort of hard to tell too, and I wonder if there was a little more reflection in its eye, if we could see whether or not it's actually looking at us. But it's a great moment, and the photographer's use of aperture really helps make this image strong. Someone to Watch Over You also received a score of 14 in the advanced category and third place. I very much enjoy the way there's an interplay between the person walking and the person that's on the mural around the billboard there. And it's almost as if the person is being watched who's walking. It's a really beautiful, decisive moment. I wish that the photographer didn't use the vignetting in the corners. I don't think that this image needs it because of the moment that was captured and because it was the use of decisive moment. That obvious use of post-production I don't think is necessary in this image. I think it works really well without it. Also, the colors in the image are pretty simple and straightforward, and they don't distract the viewer at all, which is nice.
Vitruvian Park Lighting Celebration at Addison, Advanced Category, second place, 15 points. The photographer achieved a nice sense of balance and symmetry from the even split in the frame between the trees and the structure on the top of the frame and the reflection of them in the bottom half of the frame. This image is well exposed, sharp, colorful, and dynamic. The use of a large depth of field allows the viewer to see the various details in the lights and buildings in the distance, which is satisfying. The composition also used the rule of thirds with the red bridge at the focal point along the vertical third of the frame. Well done.
Street Before Sunrise received a score of 15 and first place for the advanced category. The color in this is gorgeous. The pinks and purple that are in the sky are also reflected in the ground and in the street, and it's really just beautiful this time of day, and the light that was captured is really nice. I also really enjoy the motion of the school bus. I'm glad it's blurred. It's this idea of time passing and everything just kind of moving on and changing as the day unfolds.
Peace on Earth, Master Category, 10 points. I enjoy the directional lines and repetition created by the tree and the large and small branches leading the viewer's eye to the center of the frame. The red flag has visual weight because of its color. However, I wish the photographer took a couple of steps to the right to allow that flag to fall on a vertical third within the frame. I also wonder if the composition would work better with less of the ground and more of the sky in the frame, since the immediate foreground is static. Good exposure, lens focus, and use of color in this image.
Best Buds at Dog Park received a score of 10. The framing is nice in that the wall that the people are sitting on kind of leads us into the frame. It goes from the right side over to the left. The dog is in the foreground and sort of looking at the camera, and there's a lot of texture in the sky. I wish that we could see more detail in the people who are sitting there. Their bodies start to fade into the shadows, so I think that the exposure may have been a bit low on this one. Our Neighborhood Windmill received a score of 10 in the Master category. There's really beautiful color in this. The sky has this gorgeous purple and blue, and it's contrasted with the yellow lights over on the left side of the frame, kind of center left. The image is a little bit soft. It seems like it should be a bit sharper, and maybe through use of depth of field, but then it may also be that the camera may have been shaking a tiny bit as the image was taken. Remember When It Snowed received a score of 11 in the Master category. There's nice play between the people in the frame and the snowman. If the figures in the image were looking towards the camera or at the camera, we might, as viewers, have more interaction with them, which would be really nice. But otherwise, there is repetition in the frame between the two people wearing blue, where our eye goes first, and that has the most contrast. And then we start to see the details of the snow on the trees, and the dog, and the snowman in the background. Rusty Toad received a score of 12 in the Master category. There's great detail and texture in the metal toad itself, and a nice use of shallow depth of field. There's contrasting color here between the orange and the green, and sort of looks like the toad is looking at us. We can see the eye pretty clearly. If there was something else happening towards the top of the frame that would lead us in, I think that would make this image a bit more dynamic. In the Masters category, Possum Love received a score of 13. The photographer caught quite a moment here. Both of the possums are sharp, and I don't know what they're doing. They're snuggled together, I guess. They're sort of looking off frame, and I would love it if they were looking right at the camera, but I also wouldn't want to be that close. Nice shot. Sunset at Our Neighborhood Lake received a score of 13 in the master category. There's nice contrast between the orange and the blue in this image, and I'm glad that the people in the foreground are complete silhouettes. That's also really nice in that there's a contrast between what's three-dimensional, which is the water, versus what's more two-dimensional in the frame, which are the people in the foreground and the grasses in the foreground. It looks like there may be a little bit of over-sharpening in this image. There's just some kind of strange things happening in some of the details in the water that's towards the bottom of the frame. Some chromatic aberration, I believe. So that's just something to watch for. Our new neighbor received a score of 13 in the master category, and the photographer captured a wonderful, decisive moment here of the cat with its mouth wide open. It's sharp. We know exactly what to look at here because it's framed really well by the bush behind it. It would be interesting to see what the cat was looking at or paying attention to in addition to just the cat itself. Looking for Roadrunner received a score of 14 in the master category. That coyote in the foreground is a surprising element because my eye went to the golfers at first, and I think naturally people want to look at other people's faces, and then I noticed the coyote in the foreground. And so being able to capture that moment is really wonderful. The photographer is quick. The image is sharp. However, the golfer with the sunglasses on seems to be looking kind of off frame. He's not really looking at the coyote, he's looking at something else, which gets a little bit confusing. So I wish that he was looking at the coyote, or if there was another coyote that he was looking at, if that was actually in the frame. But it seems like an image like this is very much about luck and timing. Lonely Pine received a score of 14 in the master category, as well as an honorable mention. There's just really lovely tones in this image. There's a wide variety of tones, and the detail in the pine needles is nice and sharp, and it contrasts really well with the blurred background, so using a shallow depth of field is really nice. The image is simple, but it's fairly symmetrical, and there's a lot to look at with all of those little pine needles and all those little details within the tree versus the lines on the fence behind it and all of those little leaves in the foreground too. Winter in My Backyard received a score of 14 and also an honorable mention in the master category. The berries in the trees are red, and that sort of leads your eye around the frame through color and also through shape. The bird is the subject and is nice and sharp, and the green contrasts really well with the yellow and the red berries. And then there's also the blurred snowflakes in the background, which are just lovely. This image is a tiny bit noisy, and that would be the only thing that I would hesitate on it, and so I would recommend lowering the ISO just a little bit. Sunset Panorama received a score of 15 in the master category and third place. The use of color here is just gorgeous, and the range of color is really quite beautiful. So I realize some of this may have been adjusted a little bit in post-production, but I don't mind. And the silhouette of the trees and the houses in the foreground is also really nice. We don't need to see the detail in those things, just them being shapes, and forcing our attention towards the sky is great in this. You're Finally Home received a score of 15 in the master category and second place. I love the monochromatic colors in this image. The gray that's in the post matches the gray in the dog's eye, as well as the colors of the wood match the color of the fur, and it's just this little sliver and this little moment that's happening here, and the dog is making eye contact with the viewer, so the timing on this is also really nice. It's a beautiful image. Fire received a score of 15 in the master category and first place. I really enjoy the repetition of lines in the background and the contrasting direction of line that's happening over on the right side. Of course, our attention goes towards the firefighter who's not looking at the camera and in his own moment. And so the timing on this is really lovely. The firefighter is sharp versus the smoky background, which is blurred. And so that contrast is interesting, but also the light is really lovely in this image. It has kind of a golden tone to it, and it's at a lower angle, and so it's hitting the firefighter in a really interesting way, and it's a lovely moment. Thank you all so much for having me judge your photo contest. I very much enjoyed going through your images and looking at them and thinking about them, and it was just such a pleasure and an honor. Thank you.